3 weeks before her wedding, my only niece, the girl I helped raise like my own daughter, called to tell me I wasn't invited. Her words were calm, but they cut like glass. "Uncle, it's better if you don't come." At first, I thought I'd misheard her. The connection was clear, the tone steady, but the meaning, it didn't make sense. I could hear laughter faintly in the background, wedding chatter, music, a life moving forward, a life I had once helped build. I sat there on my old porch, the phone pressed against my ear, staring out at the setting sun. The same porch where she once sat cross-legged as a little girl, listening to my stories about her mother, my sister, and how love was meant to bind, not divide. She used to hold my hand and promise, "You'll walk me down the aisle one day, Uncle." Now, that same little girl was a woman, speaking to me like a stranger. My hand trembled, not from age, but from disbelief. I looked at the photo beside me, her at 8 years old, missing a front tooth, wearing the blue ribbon I bought her after her first piano recital. The frame was cracked from years of cleaning, but her smile had never faded. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just sat there, the phone silent in my hand, the evening wind brushing against my face. "Uncle, it's better if you don't come." The words replayed like a melody I couldn't turn off. Before I tell you what happened next, if you've ever been betrayed by someone you love more than life itself, subscribe to this channel and stay with me. This story might just speak to your soul. I've lived 66 years on this earth, and I can tell you, there's no bond purer than the one forged between a man who never had children and the child he swore to protect. When my sister passed away unexpectedly, her daughter, Clara, was only 6. Her father had left years before that, gone like wine through a field, never looking back. So, when I stood at that small graveside, holding that little girl's trembling hand, I made a promise I never said out loud: she will never face the world alone. From that day forward, she became the heartbeat of my life. I worked long days repairing bridges and rail lines across the county, but every evening, no matter how late, I came home to her. Our small wooden house by the lake became her playground, her safe haven. She loved to paint. I still remember how she'd drag her easel out to the porch, dip her brush into colors far too bright, and paint sunsets that looked more like dreams than skies. I used to tease her, told her she was wasting all her yellow paint, and she'd laugh and say, "You can't ever have too much sunlight, Uncle." She was my sunlight. When she turned 10, I taught her how to skip stones across Lake Brindle. She'd squint her eyes, tongue poking out in concentration, and when the stone finally bounced 3 times, she jumped into my arms shouting, "I did it. Just like you." That memory still echoes. Her laughter bouncing off the water, my hands steady around her small frame. Through her teenage years, we had our fights, of course. She wanted to go to art school, I wanted her to study something secure. I was wrong. Looking back, I realize I was just afraid she'd go out into a world that wouldn't cherish her the way I did. When she got accepted into the state university, I sold my truck to help pay her tuition. She cried when I told her, but I smiled and said, "That truck can be replaced." "You can't." Every holiday, she'd come home arms full of new paintings, heart full of stories. She'd run up the steps yelling, "Uncle." I made it through another semester. And I'd hug her so tight, it felt like the world couldn't touch us. When she graduated, she brought someone with her. A young man named Adrian, clean-shaven, confident, polite enough to be disarming. She introduced him as her fiancé. I shook his hand and smiled, though something inside me stiffened. There was something about his eyes, not cruel, but calculating. I'd seen that look before in men who wanted more than they deserved. Still, I stayed silent. If she loved him, that was all that mattered. I told myself love was supposed to heal, not divide. A few months later, she and Adrian got engaged officially. I remember sitting with her on the porch, the same place we used to paint sunsets together. The air smelled of lilac and lake water. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said softly, "Uncle, you'll walk me down the aisle, right? Mom would want that." I smiled and kissed her forehead. There's nothing in this world that would keep me away. I believed that. With all my heart. But slowly, things began to change. Her calls became shorter. Her visits less frequent. When I did see her, she seemed different. Softer around him, but sharper with me. like she was ashamed of where she came from. The last time she visited before the wedding, she brought him with her. Adrian shook my hand, firm, deliberate. Then he looked around the house at the worn furniture, the old photos, the chipped coffee mug I'd had since my youth, and smiled, polite but hollow. "This place is humble," he said. Clara's eyes darted to me, but she didn't correct him. She just smiled faintly and said, "It's home." I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Silence, at my age, says more than words ever can. A few days later, I received a text message. It was from her. Short, distant. "Uncle, the wedding guest list is tight. Adrian's family is covering most of it. I'll call you soon." That call never came. Weeks passed. Then, one evening, my phone rang. It was her number. I smiled, that kind of smile that still believes everything can be fixed with love. But when I answered, her voice was cold, rehearsed, detached. "Uncle, I think it's better if you don't come to the wedding." Just like that. No explanation. No hesitation. I remember staring at the wooden frame on my mantel. Her photo in her graduation gown, smiling at me, holding her degree. I whispered into the quiet room, "What did I do wrong, Clara?" There was no answer. Only the soft hum of the evening wind against the glass. I spent that night sitting by the lake, watching her reflection in my memory, the little girl with the yellow paint on her fingers. And that was when I realized something that hollowed me out completely. The love I built her life upon had somehow become the very thing she was trying to erase. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the lake until the first rays of dawn turned the water silver. The world looked calm, but inside me, everything was collapsing. The next morning, I tried to tell myself it was all a misunderstanding, that maybe she was just overwhelmed, or someone had pressured her. But deep down, I knew the tone in her voice wasn't confusion. It was conviction. 2 days later, I decided to drive into town. The florist where she used to work was still there, bright and full of color. She used to spend hours arranging bouquets, saying that flowers are how people apologize when they're too proud to speak. I thought maybe if I brought her some lilies, her mother's favorite, it might soften whatever wall had risen between us. When I pulled into her driveway, there were cars I didn't recognize. Music played faintly from inside, laughter spilling out through the open window. I knocked on the door. It was Adrian who answered. He looked surprised, but not pleasantly so. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Mr. Langston. What brings you here?" I held up the flowers. "I just wanted to talk to Clara. I think there's been a misunderstanding." He didn't move aside. "She's busy." I glanced past him and caught sight of her, standing by the staircase in a white dress, a clipboard in hand. She looked so beautiful, and so far away from the little girl I'd raised. "Uncle," she said softly, almost startled. "Clara," I whispered, stepping forward. "I just wanted to see you. Talk, maybe." "It's been." Adrian cut in, his voice sharp. "We already told you, it's better if you don't come to the wedding." I froze. "We?" He smiled, that same smug, polished smile. "Yes. It's not personal. It's just, well, the event's a bit more formal. You know, higher crowd, important people. You might feel out of place." Something in me cracked quietly. I wasn't angry, not yet. Just hollow. "Out of place?" I repeated, almost to myself. "I changed your diapers when you were sick, Adrian. I fixed your car when you couldn't afford a mechanic. I gave my niece the down payment for your first home. How much more in place could I possibly be?" He shifted his weight, his smirk fading for the first time. "That was generous of you. But this isn't about the past. This is about the image we're building now." Image. That word hit harder than any insult could. Clara stepped closer then, her voice soft but uncertain. "Uncle, please. Don't make this harder. Adrian's right. Things have changed. Her eyes flickered with guilt or maybe shame. It was hard to tell anymore. I took a deep breath. Changed? Clara, love doesn't change. Not the real kind. You think people outgrow the ones who built them? You think weddings are about image? She looked down. I just want everything to go smoothly. You might not understand. I let out a faint laugh, dry and bitter. You're right. I don't understand. For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the wind rustled through the trees behind me. Then, slowly, I placed the lilies on the porch. They were your mother's favorite, I said softly. She'd have been proud of the woman you became. I just wish I could say the same. Adrian's jaw tightened. That's enough. You should go. I looked at him, then back at her. She couldn't even meet my eyes. I turned and walked back to my truck. My legs felt heavy, but my chest was worse, hollow, like something sacred had been scooped out of me. As I opened the door, I heard Adrian's voice again. Oh, and Mr. Langston, no need to send gifts. We've got the registry covered. The words twisted inside me like a blade. I didn't turn around. I didn't give him the satisfaction. The drive home felt longer than usual. Every turn on that old country road carried a memory, her singing off-key in the passenger seat, her head resting on my shoulder after bad dreams. Now, all of it felt like a dream I'd just woken from, a beautiful lie. When I reached home, I sat in my truck long after the engine went quiet. I stared at the house. The same house where I'd raised her. The same house she'd now erased from her life. Inside, the photo on the mantel caught my eye again, Clara at 16, wearing her graduation cap, beaming. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the frame. How did we get here? I whispered. When did love turn into embarrassment? The silence had no answer. Later that night, I received a text message, a final cruelty. Uncle, please don't show up uninvited. It'll make things uncomfortable for everyone. I hope you understand. Uninvited. Uncomfortable. Everyone. The words blurred together as my eyes stung. I placed the phone down, walked out onto the porch, and looked at the lake. The reflection of the moon trembled on the surface, fractured, like everything else in my life. I thought about calling her again. About begging. About reminding her that blood doesn't wash off just because you marry into money. But then, something stopped me. A voice, faint but familiar, the echo of my late sister. Peter, love her, but never let her forget where she came from. And for the first time since that call, I felt something other than heartbreak. Resolve. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to fight. But I was going to remind her. Not with anger. Not with words. With truth. For days after that message, I didn't speak to anyone. The phone stayed silent, the house stayed dark. I'd wake before sunrise and sit by the window, coffee gone cold in my hands, staring at the lake that had reflected every season of my life. It used to bring peace, now it just reminded me of everything that had faded. The house felt emptier than ever. Her laughter used to live in these walls, echoing from the kitchen when she burned toast, from the hallway when she tried on her mother's old dresses, from the porch when she painted sunsets that were too bright for this quiet world. Now, all that remained was the soft tick of the clock and the weight of silence. On the second night, I opened the old chest in my study, the one I hadn't touched since my sister's passing. Inside were keepsakes I'd buried away, her wedding photo, Clara's baby blanket, my late wife's locket, a stack of letters written in fading ink. I ran my fingers across one of the envelopes. It was my sister's handwriting, slanted and warm. The top of the letter read, "For Peter, if I'm ever gone." I unfolded it carefully, the paper thin and fragile. Her words were steady, full of love. If I can't be there to raise her, promise me you'll remind her what family means, not with gifts, but with presence. If one day she forgets, remind her gently. And if she turns away, wait. She'll find her way back to the truth you built for her. By the time I reached the end, my eyes burned. I hadn't read that letter in 20 years. It felt like she was speaking straight through the walls. I whispered into the quiet room, I tried, Emma. I really did. The days blurred after that. I barely ate, barely slept. My neighbors noticed the lights off and started knocking, but I couldn't face anyone. What was I supposed to say? That the only person who gave my life purpose now saw me as an embarrassment? On the fourth day, the postman left a small envelope in the mailbox. It was from Clara's wedding planner. A formal note. Printed. Cold. Mr. Langston, per Miss Thompson's request, please be informed that your attendance at the wedding has been respectfully declined. We wish you well. Respectfully declined. That phrase broke something I didn't know could still break. I set the letter down and looked at my reflection in the window, an old man staring back, eyes heavy, hair thinning, hands rough from years of work. For the first time, I didn't recognize myself. That evening, I went down to the lake again. The air was thick with the smell of rain. The sky hung low, gray and tired. I watched the ripples move across the surface, remembering how she once told me, water always finds its way home, uncle. But what if home no longer wanted you? I sat there until the clouds broke and rain began to fall, slow at first, then heavy, relentless. I didn't move. Let the rain soak through my shirt, my hair, my skin. Maybe it could wash away the ache. The world blurred behind a veil of rain, and somewhere in the distance, I thought I saw her, that little girl with her paintbrush and yellow dress, waving at me from the shore. But when I blinked, she was gone. That night, I couldn't bring myself to go inside. I sat on the porch, wrapped in an old blanket, the sound of rain still echoing in my mind. I reached for my wife's old locket and opened it. Inside was a picture of Clara at 10, smiling between us. I ran my thumb over her face and whispered, "What happened to you, my girl?" No answer came, only the hum of the storm. At some point, exhaustion took over. I must have fallen asleep there because when I woke up, dawn had painted the sky gold. The rain had stopped, and everything smelled new, the earth, the air, even the silence. I stood, stiff and cold, and walked to the edge of the porch. For the first time in days, I noticed the world hadn't stopped spinning. The lake still shimmered. The birds still sang. Something inside me shifted. I realized I couldn't keep living in grief. Because grief is a storm. If you stand in it too long, it doesn't cleanse you, it drowns you. That morning, I made myself breakfast for the first time in a week. Toast and black coffee. Simple, grounding. I cleaned the table, fixed the broken porch light, even took a walk through town. People looked at me, some with pity, some with curiosity, but I didn't care. I had made a decision. I wouldn't beg for her love. But I also wouldn't disappear. She might have shut the door on me, but that didn't mean I couldn't stand on the porch and remind her who built it. I returned home, pulled out my old leather journal, and turned to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote, "Plan Clara's wedding." Then below it, "Objective, not revenge. Remembrance. Goal, to remind her of where she came from, without hate." And at the bottom, I wrote, "Approach, silence first. Then presence." I underlined that last part twice. Because sometimes silence is louder than shouting. And presence, the right kind, can haunt more powerfully than anger ever could. That day, something inside me reawakened. Not the man I'd been, but the man I needed to become. She thought she could erase me quietly. She was about to learn that love, once wronged, doesn't vanish. It remembers. And when it returns, it doesn't knock. The morning after I made my decision, I woke with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The lake outside shimmered pale blue, still damp from last night's rain. For the first time since her call, I didn't feel broken, just steady. I brewed a cup of coffee, sat on the porch, and opened my old notebook again. The page with my plan stared back at me, waiting for something more. Not revenge. Remembrance. Silence first. Then presence. I underlined the word presence again. Clara had taken my voice away, but she hadn't taken my truth. And if she wouldn't let me attend her wedding, then I would find another way to stand there, a way she'd never forget. That morning, I went into the attic and opened the old cedar chest where I kept my wife's things. The scent of lavender still clung to her dresses, even after all these years. Beneath them, wrapped in a linen cloth, was a small velvet box, one I hadn't touched since the day my wife passed. Inside was a gold locket. It wasn't expensive, but it was precious. Inside it were 2 photos, one of my late sister, and the other of a 6-year-old Clara holding a sunflower. My wife used to say, "Give this to her when she finds the love that lasts." I had planned to hand it to her on her wedding day, a symbol of everything her mother and I had built for her. Now, it had become something else entirely, a message. Not just from me. From all the love she'd tried to forget. I polished the locket, wrapped it in silk, and placed it inside a white envelope. On the front, I wrote her name in careful handwriting. Then beneath it, in smaller letters. From the ones who never left you. That week, I began to prepare not for war, but for return. First, I cleaned the house from top to bottom. It wasn't about tidiness, it was about reclaiming control. I fixed the squeaky door hinges, replaced the flickering bulb on the porch, and swept the path that led to the lake. Each act felt like mending something deeper than the walls. Next came myself. I hadn't looked in a mirror properly in weeks, maybe months. My beard had grown wild, my hair gray and untamed. My reflection looked like someone halfway between man and ghost. So I shaved, carefully, every stroke deliberate. I cut my hair short, brushed back what was left, and put on my best suit, the same dark gray one I'd worn to my wife's funeral, tailored and still sharp. When I looked again, the man in the mirror didn't look defeated. He looked composed. Measured. And that was exactly how I needed to be. I reached out to an old friend, Samuel, who owned a small catering company downtown. He'd known Clara since she was little, he'd watched her grow up right here by the lake. "Sam," I said when he answered the phone, "you're catering Clara's wedding, aren't you?" He hesitated for a moment. "I am, Pete." "You okay?" I smiled faintly. "I'm fine. I just need a favor." I explained what I wanted quietly, carefully, no drama. When I finished, there was a pause. Then he sighed softly. "You always were a proud man, Pete. I'll make sure you're there, no one will question it." "Thank you, old friend," I said. "And don't worry. I won't cause a scene." He chuckled lightly. "You never do. That's what makes people remember you." The following days passed like clockwork. I returned to my routine, every hour methodical. Each task was preparation, physical, emotional, moral. At night, I rehearsed what I'd say if I came face to face with her. Not anger. Not guilt. Just truth. "You can erase my name from your list, Clara. But you can't erase the man who helped you become who you are." Then I'd stop. Because the rest didn't need to be said. Words are for men trying to prove themselves. Presence is for those who already know their worth. One evening, I drove to the lake again, envelope in hand. I sat on the old wooden bench overlooking the water, tracing the locket through the silk. The surface of the lake was still, catching the reflection of the moon perfectly. That same moon had watched me raise her, had seen us laugh, argue, build a bond stronger than blood. Now, it watched me plan my quiet return. "Emma," I whispered to the sky, "if you're watching, help me do this right. No shouting. No revenge. Just truth." A soft breeze rustled the trees. Maybe that was her answer. A few days before the wedding, I drove into town to pick up a few things, a clean tie, a white rose boutonniere, and a new pair of gloves. I didn't plan to attend as a guest, no, that wasn't the plan. But I would walk through that place as someone impossible to ignore. On my way back, I stopped by the old churchyard. The same place my sister and wife rested. I placed 2 small lilies on their graves, the same kind I'd left on Clara's porch weeks before. "I'm going to her wedding," I told them softly. "She doesn't want me there, but I'm going. Not to shame her, just to make sure she remembers who walked her to this day. The air was still. Peaceful. When I got home that night, I laid everything out on the table: the suit, the gloves, the envelope, the boutonniere. Then I wrote one last note to tuck inside the envelope. Clara, you were never alone. But sometimes, love must remind you where it began. I folded the paper neatly, placed it beside the locket, and sealed it shut. The day before the wedding, Sam called. "It's all set," he said. "You'll be there early, helping with setup. No one will ask questions." "Thank you," I said quietly. "Pete, are you sure about this?" I paused. "I'm sure." She tried to erase me quietly. "So I'll return quietly. But when I do, she'll never forget it." That night, I sat by the window again. The sky was clear this time, no rain, no clouds. Just stars reflected on the lake like scattered candles. I could almost hear her laugh again, faint and distant, like a memory trying to crawl back to life. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Tomorrow's your big day, my girl. And I'll be there, not where you want me, but where I need to be." I took one last look around my house, the photos, the walls, the life that had raised her. Then I turned off the lights and went to bed. Tomorrow wasn't just her wedding day. It was the day she'd finally remember where she came from. And I was going to make sure of it, not through noise or anger, but through presence. Because sometimes, silence doesn't mean absence. Sometimes, it's the sound of truth preparing to walk back into the room. The morning of the wedding arrived draped in sunlight. The sky was clear, almost unnaturally bright, as if the world itself was holding its breath for what was about to unfold. I woke before dawn. Old habits die hard. I sat for a while by the window, watching the mist rise from the lake. Everything looked calm, peaceful, but I could feel the pulse of something steady and unyielding beneath my chest. I dressed carefully, dark suit pressed sharp, white shirt clean, boutonniere pinned just above the heart. The envelope, the one with the locket and the letter, slid neatly into the inside pocket of my coat. Before leaving, I stopped at the door and whispered softly to the empty room, "This isn't vengeance. This is remembrance." Then I stepped outside. The wedding venue was only 30 minutes away, a grand estate on the hill overlooking town. A place that screamed money, appearance, perfection. The kind of place Adrian would have chosen. When I arrived, the catering trucks were already lined up near the back service gate. Sam waved me over quietly. "You're early," he said, a knowing smile touching his lips. "Old men don't sleep well," I replied. He handed me a folded apron and a name tag. "No one looks twice at the staff," he said. "Once the ceremony starts, the musicians set up by the piano near the stage. That's your place." I nodded. "You've done enough, Sam. I'll take it from here." He looked at me one last time. "You sure you're ready for this?" I'd been ready since the day she told me I wasn't family anymore. Inside, the hall looked like a cathedral carved from gold. White roses hung in glass orbs above the aisle, sunlight filtering through stained windows and scattering across marble floors. Guests moved like a tide of perfume and silk, laughter rising and falling in waves. No one looked my way. No one ever does when you look like you belong to the background. I set the tray of glasses on the nearest table, straightened the sleeves of my suit beneath the apron, and glanced around. There she was. Clara. My niece. My little girl in the yellow dress. Now a bride draped in ivory lace and diamonds, her smile practiced for cameras. She looked radiant. But her eyes, those green eyes that once held warmth and wonder, they were distant. Dimmed. Adrian stood beside her, flawless in his suit, shaking hands with guests, playing the part of the perfect groom. He didn't even glance toward the staff. I stayed near the piano, moving quietly between tasks, invisible among the crowd. The ceremony began soon after. Music swelled through the air, violins, soft and ceremonial. I stood by the pianist, ready. When the minister began to speak, I could feel my heartbeat slowing, calm, steady. It wasn't until Clara began her walk down the aisle that I realized how still the room had become. Every guest turned, smiling, whispering admiration. She held her bouquet high, her veil trailing like light behind her. And then right at that moment, the pianist looked at me and gave the faintest nod. I reached out, my fingers brushing the piano keys, and began to play. It was a soft, simple melody, one I hadn't touched in years. Her favorite lullaby. The one I used to hum when she was scared of thunder, back when she'd crawl into my bed and bury her head in my chest, whispering, "Play it, Uncle. It makes the monsters go away." The sound filled the hall, fragile but clear. The pianist stepped back, letting me play alone. At first, no one noticed. Then she did. Halfway down the aisle, Clara froze. The guests looked at each other, murmuring. The minister paused. Adrian frowned, glancing toward the piano. Her eyes found me. The color drained from her face. Her mouth parted slightly, shock, disbelief, recognition all flashing through her expression at once. I kept playing. Each note was a memory. Each pause, a wound reopening quietly. She took another step, trembling. Adrian whispered something to her, but she didn't answer. By the time I reached the final note, the hall was silent. I let my hands rest on the keys, then stood. Slowly, I removed the apron and set it aside. The staff looked confused, the guests even more so. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at her. I walked toward the center of the aisle, the sound of my shoes echoing against the marble floor. The envelope in my coat felt heavy, like it carried every year I'd spent raising her. Adrian took a step forward, his jaw tight. "What the hell are you doing here?" I didn't answer him. My eyes stayed on Clara. She whispered, voice trembling, "Uncle, you." I stopped a few feet from her. "You told me not to come," I said softly. "But you forgot something, Clara. You can't uninvite the man who helped build the road you're walking on." A murmur spread through the crowd. Adrian reached for her hand, but she pulled it back slowly. I reached into my coat pocket and took out the white envelope. "This," I said, holding it out to her, "is from your mother. And your aunt. And the man who loved you enough to raise you as his own." Her hand trembled as she took it. "It's your wedding day," I continued, my voice steady. "And I came here not to stop it, but to remind you where it began." Adrian stepped forward again, his face red. "You've made your point. Now leave." I looked at him, calm. "I'm not here for you, son. I was never here for you." He bristled. "You think this is noble? Crashing her wedding like this?" I smiled faintly. "No. Noble would have been walking her down the aisle. This is mercy." He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Clara spoke, her voice small but clear. "Adrian," she said, clutching the envelope to her chest, "let him be." He froze, stunned. She turned to me, eyes wet. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I nodded. "Don't be sorry, Clara. Just remember." I turned, slowly, and began to walk back toward the piano. Behind me, I heard her open the envelope. The sound of the paper tearing echoed faintly in the silent hall. Then, her voice broke through the stillness. "It's her handwriting," she whispered. "It's Mom's handwriting." A soft gasp rippled through the crowd. She began to read, voice trembling. "If she ever forgets where she came from, remind her gently." The minister lowered his eyes. Even Adrian said nothing. Clara's tears fell freely now, blotting the paper. I reached the piano, picked up my gloves, and placed them neatly on the lid. "I don't need a seat at your table," I said quietly. "I just needed to see you remember." And with that, I walked out through the side door. The sunlight hit my face as I stepped outside, and for the first time in months, I could breathe again. Behind me, I could faintly hear applause, hesitant at first, then stronger, fuller, not for me, but for the moment. The truth had finally arrived, and it didn't need an invitation. Outside, the breeze was warm. The sky stretched wide and blue over the hill. I walked down the gravel path, feeling the weight of the years lift from my shoulders. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Because some lessons don't require witnesses. They just need to be felt. She had learned hers. And I had finally kept my promise. To her mother. To my wife. To myself. I didn't go straight home that day. Instead, I drove to the edge of Lake Brindle, the place that had been the backdrop to every joy and sorrow in my life. The sun was beginning to set, and the surface of the water glowed like molten gold. I parked by the dock and sat there, watching the light change. For the first time in a long while, I felt still. I didn't feel triumphant. Not even vindicated. What I felt was peace, that quiet, heavy kind that follows after a storm. The truth had finally spoken, not through rage or humiliation, but through remembrance. And that was enough. As I watched the sky turn to amber, I thought of Clara, of her face when she read her mother's letter, of the tears that had finally washed the pride from her eyes. I wondered what she was doing at that very moment. Whether she had continued the ceremony or paused it. Whether she understood the weight of what she'd lost. But I didn't need to know. Some truths, once spoken, don't need to be repeated. That night, I returned home. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ache anymore. I hung up my suit jacket, poured a small glass of whiskey, and sat by the window. The moon hung high over the lake, casting its silver reflection across the water. I raised my glass toward it and whispered, "It's done." And for the first time in months, I slept soundly. 3 days later, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I didn't see anyone at first. Then I looked down, and there she was. Clara. Her hair was undone, her makeup gone. She looked smaller somehow, softer, like the girl I used to know. In her hands, she held the white envelope I'd given her. For a long moment, we just stood there, no words, just silence stretching between us like a bridge rebuilt. Then she spoke. "Uncle," she said quietly, her voice trembling, I couldn't go through with it." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" She took a shaky breath. "After you left, after I read Mom's letter, I realized I didn't even know who I was anymore. I didn't recognize myself in that room. Everything about that wedding, the guests, the music, the way Adrian talked about our future, it all felt wrong." Her eyes welled up, tears spilling freely. "I let him convince me that love was about status, about image. That family was something to be curated, not cherished. But when I saw you there, when I heard that song, it hit me how much I'd thrown away." I said nothing. I just listened. She stepped closer. "I ended it, Uncle. I couldn't marry him. Not after what he made me do to you." Her voice broke on the last word. I looked at her, this woman who had once been a little girl chasing butterflies through my garden, and felt something shift inside me. The anger, the hurt, the humiliation, all of it began to melt, slow and quiet, replaced by something simpler. Sorrow. And love. I sighed softly. "You made mistakes, Clara. Big ones. But you found your way back, and that's what matters." She shook her head, tears falling harder now. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." I reached out, placing a trembling hand on her shoulder. "Maybe not. But forgiveness was never about deserving. It's about setting both of us free." She sobbed, pressing her forehead against my chest like she used to when she was small. I held her there, the sound of the lake wind whispering through the open door. When she finally pulled back, she handed me the envelope. "I kept it," she said. "I read it every night since the wedding." I smiled faintly. "Then it did its job." She looked down at her shoes, then back up at me. "Can I come in?" I nodded. "You never stopped being welcome here." That evening, we sat together on the porch, watching the sky fade from orange to gray. She told me everything about the pressure from Adrian's family, the way they mocked my humble life, the way he encouraged her to distance herself from me so she could appear more refined. "He told me love was about upgrading your life," she whispered. "But all I ever did was downgrade my heart." I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. Some confessions heal more in the saying than the answering. After a while, I went inside and brought out a framed photo, the three of us by the lake, me, her mother, and a 10-year-old Clara with paint on her cheeks. I placed it on the table between us. She stared at it for a long time. Then she whispered, "I forgot who I was." I looked out toward the lake. "You didn't forget, Clara. You were just taught to be ashamed of it. There's a difference." She wiped her tears and smiled weakly. "Do you think she would forgive me, Mom?" I nodded. "She already has. She wrote that letter years before you ever needed it. That's how love works, it forgives before it's asked to." The words hung between us, soft and heavy as dusk settled. After a long silence, she turned to me and said, "Uncle, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you showed up that day, were you angry at me?" I thought about it for a moment. Then I shook my head. "No. Anger fades. What I felt was sorrow. And beneath that, hope." "Hope?" I smiled faintly. "That one day, you'd remember who you really are." She looked away, eyes glistening. "I did. Because you showed me." By the time she left that night, the stars had come out. She hugged me one last time before walking to her car. When she reached the gate, she turned and called out, "Uncle?" "Yes?" She smiled through her tears. "Thank you for showing up." Then she drove away. I stood there watching the taillights fade down the dark road until they disappeared completely. Behind me, the porch light flickered, steady, warm, familiar. I went back inside, sat down in my old chair, and smiled to myself. The world has a funny way of healing, not through vengeance, but through truth. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's simply being remembered for what you truly were when everyone else tried to forget. It's been 2 months since that day, the day my niece found her way back home. Sometimes, when I sit out on the porch in the evenings, I still hear the faint echoes of that piano melody floating through my head. It's strange how memory works, how it can hurt you and heal you all at once. Clara visits often now. Not every day, but often enough that the silence doesn't feel empty anymore. Sometimes she brings a painting, something bright and abstract, like the one she used to make as a little girl. She says color makes her feel alive again. I tell her it suits her. There's a new calm between us now. No words left unsaid. No debts left unpaid. Last week, she brought me a framed photo, the one from the lake, the three of us together, her mother, my wife, and her at 10 years old. Only now, she's added a new picture beside it, from her wedding day. Not the one that never happened, but the new one she plans to have someday, when love finds her for the right reasons. She placed the two photos side by side on my mantle and said softly, "This time, I'll walk myself down the aisle, but you'll still be there, in every step." I didn't answer her. I just nodded, because some promises don't need words to be renewed. Sometimes I think back on everything that happened, the betrayal, the silence, the heartbreak. And I realize it wasn't just about being uninvited to a wedding. It was about being forgotten by someone I thought I'd raised to remember. But life has a way of bringing truth back, one way or another. Some lessons, it seems, can only be learned in the silence that follows the breaking. People often think revenge means destruction. But real revenge, the kind that lasts, is simply living long enough to see the truth return to the surface. I didn't need to ruin her. I just needed her to see. And she did. Now, when I look out across Lake Brindle, I don't see loss anymore. I see reflection, still water, open sky, peace. I whisper a quiet thank you to my sister, to my wife, to the years that tested me and didn't break me. Because love, real love, may be wounded, but it never disappears. It waits. It forgives. It remembers. And when it returns, it does so without anger, only truth. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved more than life itself, if you've ever felt erased, silenced, or forgotten, subscribe to this channel. Because stories like this one remind us that silence isn't weakness, it's the echo of dignity finding its voice again. And when dignity finally speaks, the world listens.